Reverend Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Shri Shri Koda Nitai Maya Toshashi Ki Jai. Nitai Gauda Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th Canto, Chapter 10, Maharaj Rahugana meets Jad Bharat, text number 14. It's quite complex Sanskrit, so I won't ask everyone to repeat it. I'll be struggling to say it myself. Shri Shuka Uvacha Etavad Anuvada Paribhasaya Pratyudira Munivara Upasamashila Uparatanatmya Nimita Upabhogena Karmarabdham Vyapanayan Arajayanam Apitato Vaha. Something like that. Please repeat. Shri Shuka Uvacha. Sukadev Goswami continued to speak. Itavat. So much. Anuvada Paribhasaya. By explanatory repetition of words spoken previously by the king. Pratyudhira. Giving replies one after another. Munivara. Great sage Jad Bharat. Upashamashila. Who was calm and peaceful in character. Bharata. Cease. Anatya. Things not related to the soul. Nimitta. Whose cause? Ignorance. For identification with things not related to the soul. Upabhogena. By accepting the consequences of his karma. Karma arabdham. The resultant action now attained. Vyapanayan. Finishing. Rajayanam. The palanquin of the king. Api. Again. Tata. As before. Uvacha. Uvaha. Continued to carry. Translation. Shukadev Goswami said, O Maharaj Parikshit, when King Rahugana chastised the exalted devotee Jad Bharat with harsh words, that peaceful, saintly person tolerated it all and replied properly. Nescience is due to the bodily conception, and Jad Bharat was not affected by this false conception. Out of his natural humility, he never considered himself a great devotee, and he agreed to suffer the results of his past karma. Like an ordinary man, he thought that by carrying the palanquin, he was destroying the reactions of his past misdeeds. Thinking in this way, he began to carry the palanquin as before. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. An exalted devotee of the Lord never thinks that he is a Paramahamsa or a liberated person. He always remains a humble servant of the Lord. In all reverse conditions, he agrees to suffer the results of his past life. He never accuses the Lord of putting him into a distressed condition. These are the signs of an exalted devotee. Tate nukampam susamikshamana. When suffering reversed conditions, the devotee always considers that the reversed conditions are the Lord's concessions. He is never angry with his master. He is always satisfied with the position the master offers. In any case, he continues performing his duty in devotional service. Such a person is guaranteed promotion back home, back to Godhead, as stated in Srimad Bhagavatam. Tatte nukam pam susamikshamano bunjana evatma kritam vipakam. Hridvag vapubir vidadan namaste jiveta yo mukti pade sadhaya bak. Thank you, Prabhu. My dear Lord, one who constantly waits for your causeless mercy to be bestowed upon him, and who goes on suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds, offering you respectful obeisances from the core of his heart, is surely eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. Shukadeva Goswami said, O Maharaj Parikshit, when King Rahugana chastised the exalted devotee Jad Bharat with harsh words, that peaceful, saintly person tolerated it all and replied properly. Nescience is due to the bodily conception, and Jad Bharat was not affected by this false conception. Out of his natural humility, he never considered himself a great devotee, and he agreed to suffer the results of his past karma. Like an ordinary man, he thought that by carrying the palanquin, he was destroying the reactions of his past misdeeds. Thinking in this way, he began to carry the palanquin as before. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Uta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parajana Sahitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakan Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvishesha Sanyavadi Pastichade Shatarane Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhe evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So okay, so a few interesting points here. Well, a few points for contemplation, actually. One of them is this principle of, as Srila Prabhupada mentions right in the beginning of the purport, an exalted devotee of the Lord never thinks that he is a paramahamsa or a liberated person. He always remains a humble servant of the Lord. And then Srila Prabhupada, I would say a lot of this purport and this verse is really emphasizing the principle and the qualities and practice of humility and tolerance. So, you know, we chant, at least those of us who sort of attend the morning program at the temple, and also other devotees as well, we make it like a daily practice to either chant the entire 8 prayers of Lord Chaitanya's Shikshastakam, or at least to chant the 3rd verse of the Shikshastakam prayers. So we do it here as part of the morning program. Sometimes devotees chant the Shikshastakam before they begin to chant japa, or they just make it part of their daily sadhana to recite the Shikshastakam prayers. So these prayers by Lord Chaitanya, although Lord Chaitanya, I mean, he gave volumes and volumes and volumes of instruction. We see that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Chaitanya Bhagavat, all these different biographies of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's manifest pastimes. Then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was always instructing either by his words or by his behavior. That's why he came to the world, to teach by his own example how to be a devotee. But at least what is known to us is that he only directly composed 8 verses of Sanskrit literature, so to speak. And those 8 verses are known as the Shikshastikam prayers. There's different thoughts on what it means that he composed them, because generally it's said that Lord Chaitanya wrote these 8 verses. But when we read the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's actually the last chapter in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Shikshastikam prayers. So it's the conclusion of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. And at least the way that it's depicted there is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke these verses. He composed them, but he spoke them. So it's not known whether he actually literally wrote them down, and that somewhere there is Lord Chaitanya's personal handwriting on a document somewhere, a manuscript somewhere hidden away in some temple. But he spoke them. He spoke these verses and he composed these verses. And these verses are considered to be really the essence of all of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. So there's a nice... in the introduction to one of Shivaram Swami Maharaj's books, Venu Gita, he speaks about the principle of writing. Because those books which he wrote, they're individual chapters from the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and then he's, based upon the all the different commentaries written by different acharyas, then he's really expanded those chapters into big books. So he was saying there, if you take a cotton wool ball, like a ball of cotton wool, it sits in the palm of your hand quite small. It's just like, 1 or 2 cubic inches in the palm of your hand. Seems quite small. But if you start pinching the cotton wool, then it opens up and it opens up and it opens up, and then it can fill a really large space. If you do it very, very carefully, you can just slowly pinch it and open it up and open it up and open it up until it would be too big to fill 2 hands. It would really open up, So there's a lot contained within that small area of cotton wool. So in the same way, these literatures like the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Gita, the Shikshastikam prayers, it appears that we're just reading one verse, and at first glance we may not see so much within that one verse. But then when you start unpacking it and you start opening it up, then you find that there's practically unlimited knowledge contained within that small amount of words. So just like the Bhagavad Gita is only 700 verses, and many of those verses, they've become so much part of our lives that we don't even necessarily think so much when we say them. We just recite the verses. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. All the, abandon all varieties of religion and just surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. We just say these verses. We say them. We read the Bhagavad Gita. We do chad. Okay, I'll just quickly do my chapter. Just quickly get my chapter out of the way. Let's just quickly get chad out of the way so that I can get on with some other things, But Krishna's unlimited. Krishna's completely unlimited. So everything that Krishna says is unlimited. So every single one of those verses in the Bhagavad Gita or the Srimad Bhagavatam, because the Bhagavatam is the literary incarnation of Krishna, or the Shikshastika prayers, which are the direct instructions of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or any of these other manifestations of Krishna in his literary forms, they're all completely fathomless and unlimited. And there's no limit to how much we can discuss. I know different devotees do this. Raghunath and I, we try to get together once a week when there's time, and we discuss Bhagavatam, and sometimes we'll read the verse that we're going to be reading that day, and then we'll just get caught on one word. Oh, what does that word mean? We'll look it up in the dictionary, and then we spend the next hour just talking about that one word. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he also taught this by example. I think it was either the first verse or the first 3 verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he gave class on them. Does anyone remember the amount of time? You remember, Raghunath, how long he spoke on those verses for? Couple of months. So it was like 2 months on one verse. And actually he said actually we can just go on talking about these verses for the rest of our lives. He said, I'm just showing you that there's no limit to how much we can say, but actually, it's not that we've reached the end now after 2 months. You just go on and on and on. So the Shikshastikam prayers of Lord Chaitanya are very, 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 very important. This is a typical example of this, actually. I'm realizing I just sort of mentioned the word, the verses, the things about humility and tolerance, and then we just go off on this tangent. And sometimes Srila Prabhupada would do that. Jayadvaita Swami Maharaj, he was saying that once Srila Prabhupada gave class, and he read the verse and the purport of the Bhagavatam, and then before speaking, he chanted Om Agyanati Mirandasya. And then he said, Agyana. And then he just went off on a whole class all about the word Agyana, which had nothing to do with the verse or the purport, but it was just somehow Prabhupada was inspired by that. But anyway, in the Shikshastikam prayers, you have all of Lord Chaitanya's teachings. So like cotton wool can be expanded, all of Lord Chaitanya's teachings are present within the Shikshastikam prayers. And we can learn these very easily. It's 8 verses. That's something that we can get, learning an entire chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that may be a little bit out of our reach at the moment, but 8 verses is quite attainable. Most of us know the Guru Vastakam prayers, the song that we sing Mangalarti in the morning, Samsara Davanala Lida Loka. So most of us know this by heart. That's the same, 8 verses. Astaka means 8 verses. So it's quite attainable, and by chanting these prayers every day, we're associating with Lord Chaitanya, and the more we chant them and the more we think about it while we're chanting them, we shouldn't just recite it parrot fashion, but we should really think very, very carefully as we're reciting these prayers, what's being said here. And if you make that a daily practice, then you just go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the meaning. So it's really worthwhile learning these Shastikam prayers. And the 3rd verse of the Shastikam, Trinadapi Sunichina, Tarodapi Sahishnuna, Madina Manadena, Kirtaniya Sadahari. I think most of us know this. Most of us know this verse. We chant it every morning. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respects unto others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. And we could really go into a whole thing just about the flow of the Shastikam prayers, so I'll have to really try and restrain myself and keep it to the topic. But Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, who is the author of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, about this particular verse, he says that one should in fact, was it Lord Chaitanya that said it as part of... Because Lord Chaitanya, as he's speaking the Shastikam prayers, he's simultaneously commenting on them. So when you read that chapter in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's not that you just get the 8 verses one after the other. He says one, and then he speaks about that verse for some time, and then he speaks the next one, and then... So the 8 verses are kind of spread over this whole chapter in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So I can't remember, it's a long time since I've read it. I don't remember whether it's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself or Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, but the Chaitanya Charitamrita says that one should string this verse on the thread of the holy name and wear it around his neck. So in other words, we should carry this verse with us everywhere we go. It should be present within our heart, within our mind, everywhere we go. So this principle of humility is actually said to be the ornament of a Vaishnava. This is the ornament of a Vaishnava that we carry with us everywhere we go. So if you have something very, 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 very valuable, then the tendency is you always want to know where it is. You're always thinking about it, and ideally you keep it with you so that you know that no one's breaking into your house and stealing it while you're out or something like that. So we keep this principle of humility and tolerance and pridelessness with us everywhere that we go. We thread it on the string of the holy name and carry it with us everywhere that we go. So it's a very, very important principle, and it's one that we hear about it a lot, we speak about it a lot, we discuss it a lot, this principle of the need for humility, because, this is really the qualification for our entering into the depths of the holy name. The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is Chintami, Nama Chintamani Krishna's Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha, that it's a priceless Chintamani gem, and it's non-different from Krishna. It's the actual form of Krishna in the form of his holy name. It's completely priceless. But and everything is contained within the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. I mean, if we're going to get really deep about it, Hare is Srimati Radharani, Krishna and Rama, this is Krishna. So, and wherever they are, all of their pastimes are present. You have the name, form, qualities, and pastimes. So from the name reveals the form, then in due course of time reveals Krishna's qualities, and in due course of time reveals the pastimes. And in the most esoteric sense, Hare Krishna is Radha and Krishna. So the most confidential pastimes of the spiritual world and the entire spiritual world itself, the entirety of Goloka Vrindavan, and all the pastimes that take place within that transcendental realm, they're all there, they're all contained within the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. So that's deep. That's something very, very deep. That's not something to be taken lightly. That's not something to be like, oh, let's just get my rounds out of the way. It's like we have this intensely just undescribable opportunity of entering into the most confidential pastimes of the spiritual world as soon as we chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. But it has to be revealed, and Krishna reveals the confidential secrets of the holy name according to our quality, and most significantly the quality that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Krishna are searching for is this quality of humility, tolerance, and pridelessness. That they're very attracted by this. Krishna is very attracted. Krishna Krishna doesn't like his devotees becoming proud and puffed up. So when there is pride there, usually Krishna makes some kind of arrangement to sort of reduce that pride somehow or other. So it's best that we try to reduce it within ourselves. So then the question comes, well, how can I do that? How do I actually develop these qualities? So, there are ways that, we are Vaidhi Sadhana Bhaktas. We are aspiring devotees who are practicing the rules and regulations of devotional service in the hope that in time we can become more spontaneous in our devotion. But right now we're practicing a more sort of regulated devotional service. That means devotional service in practice. Sadhana bhakti means literally devotional service in practice. So we're practicing to be devotees. We're practicing devotional service. It's like, before you get, I haven't got one because I managed to crash 2 cars, but, if you're going for a driver's license, then you first of all practice learning to drive before you're actually allowed to drive. So you're allowed to get in the car, you're allowed to sort of go through the motions of driving, but you're not considered to be a qualified driver. You don't get your license, you're not allowed in that car on your own on the roads until you first of all show that you've practiced to a sufficient level that you're showing that I'm actually capable of doing this. So, and then once you show that to your instructor, then it's like, okay, now I authorize you to go ahead and drive. So in the same way, we are trying to show, we are learning from our guru how to practice devotional service. And then we're trying to simultaneously show our gurus, is this okay, what I'm doing? Is the way that I'm serving the deities, the way that I'm cooking for Krishna, the way that I'm offering my food, the way that I'm chanting Hare Krishna, is this okay? And then, in due course of time, when our guru becomes satisfied with our our example of practicing devotional service, then our guru will recommend us to Krishna. and then we get passport stamped, and then hopefully we can begin the process of entering into Krishna's pastimes. That's a whole other aspect of bhakti. But so we want to practice these qualities of humility and tolerance. So I think it came up in class the other day when Dr. Krishna Prabhu was giving class, and he was saying, it's like we chant these verses, Matra Sparshas Tukonteya, Shitoshnas Tukadukada, Agamapayano Nityastam Statikshasva Bharata, O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O Sian of Bharat, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So we say it, and then Dr. Prabhu said, and then we go out on Sankirtan and it's raining, or it's snowy, or it's really windy, or it's really cold, and it's like, no, not interested, I'm not going to do this today, So we actually have to practice it. We have to say, okay, Krishna's been telling me this, now it's time to put it into practice. I just continue my service and don't complain, or at least try not to complain. The mind may complain. It is a gradual process. So if the mind complains, we shouldn't think, that's it, I'm a complete failure. We try to practice. We try to practice being tolerant. We try to practice being humble. Of course, that's also something that we can go a little bit far with. It's like, there was, you can probably find it on YouTube. There's a sort of series of comedy skits by one devotee in New York area. I think he's called Yadu Nandan or something. He's an actor. He's a very, very talented devotee. And he does like a sort of stand-up routine. And the name of the performance is called Pam Ho. So Pam Ho is please accept my humble obeisances. And he does this really funny routine about it. I'm not very good at comedy, so I won't try and be funny, but he does this really funny thing. It says, he's saying, Pam Ho, it's nice, it's simple. Please accept my humble obeisances. And he said, but sometimes we sort of take it to the next level. Please accept my most humble obeisances. That's also nice, that's okay. Please accept my most fallen humble obeisances. And he's kind of showing how it just goes further and further and further. And then he kind of keeps going with it. And by the end of it, it's like, please accept my most fallen, humble, prostrated obeisances in the dust of your lotus feet, each of which smells like a freshly cooked samosa. It's like, it just becomes like ridiculous levels. It's like, okay, okay, you're humble. Okay, there's no need to make a gigantic song and dance about it. But we practice humility, and also how can we actually develop these qualities? Well, one way is to practice them. That's why reading about Vaishnavas is so important. It's interesting because the Srimad Bhagavatam literally means the beautiful pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's what the word Srimad Bhagavatam means. But when we read the Bhagavatam, so much of the Bhagavatam is descriptions of the devotees of the Lord. Jad Bharat, Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, the Pandavas. It's descriptions of the devotees. Why? Because in order to approach the Lord, we have to first of all find out what it means to be a devotee of the Lord. So we learn from their personal example. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, and particularly in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we learn so much about Vaishnav behavior, Vaishnav etiquette. Anyone that wants to know, devotees ask, what's Vaishnav behavior? Study the Chaitanya Charitamrita. See not only the behavior of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but the behavior of Lord Chaitanya's associates. See how they interact with one another. See how they behave. See how they associate together, and the things they do together, and the things they speak about together, and the way they speak to one another. That's the best example of Vaishnava etiquette, the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So we have to read these books regularly to get an idea of what it is that we're supposed to be practicing. But the other thing is that we develop the qualities, or we develop qualities according to the people that we associate with and serve. So by associating with devotees that have good qualities, and by serving those devotees, when you serve Vaishnavas, there's like a sort of invisible reciprocation which takes place, where you actually are blessed with their good qualities. When you serve Vaishnavas, you're blessed with their good qualities by serving them. So serving devotees and associating with devotees and hearing from devotees, then we develop the qualities of devotees. So if we're looking to develop certain qualities, we want to look for people who have those qualities. And if we want to avoid bad qualities, then we have to avoid the association of people who have those bad qualities. In the Upadeshamrita, the Nectar of Instruction by Srila Rupa Goswami, he describes the six things which are unfavorable for bhakti and the 6 things which are favorable for bhakti. So of the 6 things which are unfavorable, one of them is associating with worldly minded people who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And of the things that are favorable, one of them is abandoning the association of non-devotees. So it's interesting, I think it's the only one that appears in both of those, both favorable and unfavorable, but just described in a slightly different way. Avoiding the association, abandoning, associating with worldly minded people, that's bad for devotional service. Abandoning the association. So it's interesting, although it actually does in the next one, in the last one, it says following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. But Rupa Goswami gives even greater emphasis to avoiding bad association in those two verses where it describes the favorable and unfavorable aspects of bhakti than he does in taking good association. Taking good association comes in the next 2 verses, texts 4 and 5. He describes the 6 living exchanges, and then he explains the different ways that we associate with devotees. How to associate with a kanista, how to associate with a madhyam, how to associate with the uttama. So that comes later. But first of all, he really emphasizes abandoning the association of non-devotees. Of course, we have to be careful how we go about doing that, because that doesn't mean that we just turn our back on family and friends and colleagues and acquaintances. Because for the first thing, that's really not going to attract people to Krishna consciousness. And secondly, it's just not very practical. And thirdly, it's just quite rude and obnoxious. So we have to be careful how we actually apply these principles. But they are principles to keep in mind, is how we take association. And taking association can come in many, many different ways. It's not just who we're physically in the proximity of that determines that we're associating with those people. Right now, we're associating with Krishna in the form of the Srimad Bhagavatam. We're associating with Shukadev Goswami, who's speaking the Bhagavatam. Parikshit Maharaj, who's hearing the Bhagavatam. We're associating with King Rahugana, who's being described. We're associating with Jad Bharat, who's being described. We're associating with Srila Prabhupada, whose purports are being written. And we're associating with all the acharyas whose purports Srila Prabhupada based his purports on. So even reading sacred texts like the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that's association. We're getting the association of Krishna and his devotees through these texts. So, and also when we hear, we listen to classes like on the subject of humilities. I heard just recently someone was saying that someone directly asked Radhanath Swami Maharaj, because he's really known for humility. It's what he emphasizes in his classes, and it's what he exemplifies by his behavior. And someone actually asked him, how is it that you do this? How is it that you manage to remain so humble? And I don't know if you can clarify this, but apparently his answer was, because I practiced for a long time. It's a pretty straightforward answer. I practiced. You've actually got to practice it. You need to keep practicing day after day after day. Keep reminding yourself to behave in this way. I would say that's also a manifestation of his humility, because he's one of the most naturally humble people that I've ever heard. But we have to practice it. So so when we hear these devotees speak, we listen to their classes, we read their books, then we're associating with them. And in the same way, bad association comes through similar mediums. Nowadays, and especially as devotees, because there's 2 things. There's sinful behavior and there's offensive behavior. Now, both are to be avoided, but of the 2, sinful behavior is actually less detrimental than offensive behavior of the two. So especially nowadays when we're really opened up, we're all on, it's not even an issue anymore that does anyone have a phone with them. We've all got phones, we've all got Facebook accounts, we've all got Instagram, we've all got social media. It's just part of life in the world now. It's part of who we are, and it's part of life that goes on. But by engaging in those types of activities, we have to be very, 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 very careful whose association we're taking through the written word, because there's a lot of beneficial and helpful information out there that can help us to advance in our bhakti, but also there's an awful lot of offensive stuff there. It's like there's an awful lot of Vaishnav aparad, there's an awful lot of criticism of devotees, criticism of the Krishna consciousness movement. There's a lot of very, very heavy stuff, and it has a weird sort of effect that when things are bad for you, they tend to really suck you in, and really it's like a kind of morbid curiosity that sort of pulls us towards these kind of things, and we can very easily, it's like, as the saying goes, we can very easily end up going down the rabbit hole and ending up in Wonderland, where it's like this just phantasmagoria or Pandora's box of unwanted stuff that will really, really pollute the mind and intelligence. So we have to be we have to really exercise discrimination, who we associate with, how we associate with them, what we read, who we listen to, who we read from, and not just devotees, but also, there's so much. I was speaking, a couple of us were discussing the other day that, I first came here when I was 21 years old, and at that point I'd had 21 years of practically zero exposure to the news and current affairs. I just didn't have a single drop of interest in it. Now that may be taking things to another extreme, because if you're old enough to vote, and if the government's going to be bad for, say for instance, spreading Krishna consciousness, then we need to at least be aware of that. But I had 21 years of absolutely zero exposure or interest in news, and then a further 4 or 5 years of continuing to not be interested in it and just distributing Srila Prabhupada's books. And then on September the 11th, 2001, all of a sudden, it's like I need to know every single thing that's happening in the world, everything. I need to read every newspaper, and somehow from that date, it's just become like this absolute avalanche of current affairs. And how much of it is really of any actual value to our practicing bhakti, if we consider the amount of hours that we spend reading up on things that are going on in the world, and we compare that to the amount of hours, how if we add up how many hours am I online, how many hours am I reading Facebook, how many hours am I looking at Instagram, how many hours am I reading the news, and then compare that, how many hours a day am I studying Shastra, how many hours a day am I reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam. And if the balance shifts towards something which is really not going to be in your eternal best interest, then we need to readdress the balance. Because as much as we're reading and exposing ourselves to these things, we're actually associating with those people. That becomes our association. That becomes our interaction. That practically becomes our social life. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is teaching by his own example, and his devotees are teaching by their example, that, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, this is a Vaishnav social life. This is what it means to be a devotee and to associate with other devotees, and this is what it means to be humble and tolerant and so on and so forth. And by associating with those devotees through their teachings, and by associating in Vaishnav Sangha, and what does Vaishnav Sangha mean as well, because that's also not just I'm sitting in a room with someone who chants 16 rounds a day. That's not devotee association. If you're sitting with someone and you're talking about, I don't know, movies or news and things like this, and it's not directly related to your service or to your Krishna consciousness, then that's not Vaishnava association, that's not Sadhu Sangha. It may be that it's something that's part of our life at the moment. We may be in a sort of transition period towards becoming a pure devotee. But we should know what is Sadhu Sangha, what is Vaishnav Sangha. Vaishnav Sangha means hearing, chanting, remembering Krishna. That's Sadhu Sangha, performing devotional service together in Krishna consciousness. Discussing Krishna conscious topics or topics related to Krishna consciousness in the association of devotees. That's Sadhu Sangha. That's what we need, and we want our life to be organized in such a way that as much as possible, that's the emphasis. That is the sort of the weight. The scales are tipping in favor of that association. Other things may be there. Other things may have to be there. Our work may demand that other things may be there. Our family life, our social life, these things may demand that at least at this point in our life, there are other things there in our life that we can't just turn our back on. That's okay. That's okay. But as far as the scales go, we want that they're moving in the favor of Krishna. The weight is, the emphasis is on Krishna. There's more Krishna consciousness than non-Krishna consciousness in our life. And if we can keep that balance, then we're always going to be moving in the direction of Krishna. So, Jad Bharat, he's displaying these very, very important qualities: humility, tolerance, so on and so forth. And we want to develop these qualities as well. And we will develop these qualities by associating with those devotees and those people who have those qualities. How do we associate with them? We need to learn how to associate together in Sadhu Sangha, and we need to be careful whose association we take in the form of reading and hearing, submissive oral reception. Submissive, it's an interesting expression, submissive oral reception. Prabhupada uses this expression quite a lot. Submissive, we submit ourselves. So if we're submitting ourselves to the news, we're submissive, we just become like, okay, whatever you need to tell me, I'll just, that's not so healthy. So our submissive oral reception is given to those people in whose association we can develop the types of qualities that are actually going to attract Krishna and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because they're attracted by humble devotees, who have the right kind of qualities. So this is the lesson of Jad Bharat for today. So if there's any questions or comments, corrections, if there's anyone online who has any questions or comments, then please post those. Raghav?
Comment and a question. You mentioned that actually before, but it is interesting to reflect on this again. I was looking a little bit about denial psychology, why people live in denial, what is the reason, psychological reason for it. And so in psychology they say that it's not only you can live in a denial, but you can also live in a group denial as well. Because few people, your friends, etc., ignoring certain facts that needs to be done about their life in general, politically, or whatever, but they're not doing anything about it. So you can be in denial. A little bit denial is okay because you're processing, information, and that's natural reaction. But if you always live in denial, there's a problem. So anyway, I don't want to speak about denial, but they were saying, how to avoid and how to get out of that thing of being in a denial of something. And one thing is actually you avoid association of the people who are also living in a denial. So that they recommend that in psychology. If you want to get out of certain thinking patterns, you can't be with the people who are also thinking in the same way. So it's interesting, but when you hear that in the spiritual circles, it sounds a bit cultish, and don't associate with these people who are materialistic. But it's just in all spheres of life, if you have if you're speaking with people who have got, got certain types of thinking that is not good for you, you avoid those people, and then you can develop healthy ways of thinking.
Yeah.
So the same thing, applies in the spiritual life. So this was looking at that, and I thought that's kind of can be helpful to explain those principles to people,
Mm.
in a more accessible way that is not just in Krishna consciousness, but is actually there are a number of spheres of life, including psychology, that recommend avoid this kind of people because they're going to damage the way how you're thinking, or you won't be able to give up certain types of thinking that is bad for you. I think.
Mm.
So this one thing. Then I have a question as well regarding this, tolerance and tolerating or seeing things as this is your, karma,
Mm.
taking a token reaction. So, I personally find it when I see other people, then, somebody treats you with harsh words, whatever they do, person or bad mood, or a bad day or whatever, then you kind of become overwhelmed with certain type of emotions and negativity, and at that time, to think, I'm just getting a token reaction of karma, obviously, not just bad, perfectly
Yeah.
has effect. And it's quite hard, it's difficult, or sometimes almost impossible.
Yeah.
That we can suggest something about that.
Yeah. It's not so much that we don't react; it's more how we react. So there's a few. I mean, practically speaking, there's a couple of things that we can actually do in that kind of situation. And again, I'm speaking from theory because I know it's like all these things. That's why, bhakti is just an ongoing thing. We're constantly trying to remind ourselves that actually, no, that was wrong the way I did that then. It's like we may not be perfect right now. We may know what's the right thing to do, but still we may fall victim to those things. So we're trying to it's like an uphill struggle that we're on. But one thing is that, trying to avoid harsh speech. So someone may speak to us harshly, and we can respond to that, but it doesn't mean that we have to respond harshly. Being humble and tolerant doesn't mean that we don't respond to it. It's like, okay, we tolerate, so it's raining outside, let me tolerate. Doesn't mean that we don't put on a coat and a hat and gloves and scarf and wrap ourselves up and keep ourselves as warm as we can. That's just silly. It's like, okay, I should just... And we've seen this. It's like sometimes we become fanatics. And it's like, let me go outside in the snow and wearing a pair of underpants because I'm trying to be tolerant. That's just not tolerance. That's just being silly. There's no need for that kind of thing. So in the same way, when people speak harshly, we can respond to it. But we try not to respond harshly. We can say, so we try to respond in a sort of, Prabhu, can I give my side of it? Can I sort of, or can I just explain why that hurts, what you just said? So we can respond, but in a sort of, in as gentle and as polite and respectful a way as we can, but we can respond. It's not, tolerance doesn't mean that you don't respond, it's more how you respond to something. But the other thing is patience. Rupa Goswami recommends patience in the Nectar of Instructions. So when people treat us like that, we can wait. Let's wait an hour or so before responding. Because when there's an immediate response, it tends to be an emotional response. So as much as possible, we want to try and avoid these overly emotional responses to things, because that can tend to bring with it, when we become overly emotional, that's when it becomes like, okay, I'm taking this personally, and I'm gonna, and it becomes like an issue. And I'm like, I say that, but I also know what it's like to actually respond in that way. So it is a trap that we can easily fall into. But those are the two ways that we can respond to these things. Is first of all, try to respond in a way which is expressing our mind, but in a way which is polite, respectful, confrontational, but try to. But if in the moment it doesn't really lend itself to that, sometimes things are so heated that you can try and do that, but it's just not going to work because there's so much heat and emotion there. So in those cases, the best thing to do is just step out of the picture for a little while and then wait until there's an appropriate moment and then try and address it. I was listening to a discussion with Mahatma Prabhu a few weeks ago, and he was saying that when we see things online and someone upsets or offends us online or something like that, he says what he recommends and what he himself sometimes does is he says write it, but don't send it. You write it down, but you don't actually send it to the person. That way you're sort of saying what you want to say to the person without actually sending it. And then by doing that, he says what he finds happen is you write it and you go away. And because you've written it down, your mind starts to process it in a different way. Writing is very, very powerful. It's a very powerful medium. And then he goes back to it and he starts to change it. Actually, I'd rather say it this way. Actually, I'd rather say it that way. And then gradually, the words change as we're processing it. So he says, I react to it, but by doing it in this way, it means that we have a bit more time to sort of process things within our own mind and say it in a way which is the most sort of beneficial for all parties, you know. So, yeah, it's like reacting to things isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's more how we react to them that's bad. Is that okay? Anything that you'd like to sort of add to that? Okay, and I think, was it Laura and Kat had their hands up? Oh, really? Okay, and Kat, did you have your hand up?
I like when you said that we can go over the top of humility, and if we can take it too far and try to prove ourselves as humble, and I think that's kind of defeating the purpose of humility, because you're trying to be not proud, you're trying to be humble, but then if you're trying to show off by being humble, that's not really being humble, it's proud. Yeah. So I really like that example.
Yeah, it's a good observation. There was actually one time Prabhupada, one of Prabhupada's disciples went in and said, Srila Prabhupada, I am the most, something like, I am the most fallen of all your servants. And Srila Prabhupada said, you're the most nothing, you're just insignificant. It's like, oh. You know, but it's like you say, it's a perfect observation. It's like I'm trying to be the most fallen, I'm the most humble. It's like, it's a complete contradiction. You can't be the most humble. It's just silly, you know. But yeah, it's a good observation. Is there anything online from anyone? No?
It's just from Anapayani Mataji. She says,
Anapayani, that's my Prabhu's disciple.
She just makes a comment, I needed to hear that and be reminded. Thank you.
Thank you, Anapayani. And you're also invited to join the Bhakti Life program anytime you like. You're on the group for it, so always be happy to have you there. Okay, let's stop and do some service. Service is the other way that we can develop humility. By service, we become humble, especially if we do service in a nice service mood. Well, actually, it's day off, so we can develop humility by other types of service. It's day off for you. Okay, Hare Krishna. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Shri Kodamitai Maya Pushashi ki jai, Nitai Gaur Pramananda.
Haribol, His Grace Ramananda Prabhu ki jai.